Xbox's legacy contains some of the biggest games from the last 2 decades, the first successes of online console gaming, and some truly revolutionary hardware. But right now in 2024, Microsoft's gaming division is in a strange place, and there's arguably been more questions than ever about the future of the brand. As such, it's an appropriate time to look back on their history, starting from the humble beginnings of the first giant green and black X of the original Xbox to today, and picking out the best Xbox title of every year. In the name of fairness, this list will only consider exclusives, including timed or staggered releases, or in some cases console exclusives where a game that was also released simultaneously for Windows. So with that said, I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and here is the best Xbox game of every year from 2001 to 2024. 2001, Halo Combat Evolved. With the original Xbox launching in November 2001, there's a fairly small roster of games to pick from. That said, the choice is clear. Development of Halo Combat Evolved was a tumultuous road, starting in 1997 as a Mac computer real-time strategy title in its earliest form. Through the years, Halo would transform into a first-person shooter that led players through a deep spacefaring narrative. The first installment introduced the world to the legendary figure of Master Chief, the face of not just the Halo series but the Xbox brand. Even today, when the franchise is in a less healthy place, Spartan 117 is still synonymous with the big green X. Microsoft needed a big system seller, and Halo got the world talking instantly. There was something completely addictive about the gameplay loop, the thrill of fighting down waves of aliens with a roster of incredibly satisfying weaponry, not to mention vehicular combat, across some massive maps. It pioneered in a great many places, and where it wasn't the first, it was quite simply the most refined, breaking open the floodgates for console FPS experiences. It's appropriate to kick this list off with almost unquestionably the most important game in the history of Xbox. It's not too bold a claim that its success allowed Microsoft to take the foothold they needed to enter the console gaming market. 2002, Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell. Around the late 90s, Ubisoft began using the Tom Clancy branding on several military-focused shooters. The first was Rainbow Six, based on an actual Clancy book, then came Ghost Recon, and in 2002, Splinter Cell arrived. The first game released from the Ubisoft Montreal studio, Splinter Cell was described by audiences as a hyper-real Metal Gear Solid, which was exactly the point. Developers sought an answer to the upcoming PS2 eventual mega hit MGS2, and in so doing kicked off their very own franchise. Sam Fisher's premiere mission broke new ground with the jaw-dropping lighting system which sat at the core of the concept. Now it wasn't simply about evading an enemy's line of sight, but directly interacting with it by taking out light and then navigating through the darkness with night vision goggles. Players used light and shadow to their advantage, carefully tracking the amount of sound they were making and flicking to the heat-sensitive visor to keep an eye on enemies. Splinter Cell opened the door to brand new levels of immersive digital worlds and won a bevy of awards for its efforts. And yes, the game did eventually come to the PS2 and GameCube, but for the first 5 or so months it was a tantalizing Xbox exclusive that made early adopters of Microsoft's system glad they were in on the ground floor. 2003, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. It's one thing to press a button and swing an electronic lightsaber, and it's a whole other to step into the galaxy far, far away and live it. This is what made 2003 Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic as special as it was. KOTOR, as it's come to be known, is revered for a good number of things. It's one of the games that really put BioWare on the map before they started work on their own IPs. It innovated on character customization for the genre, offering various classes and the chance to fight on either the light side or dark side of the Force. More than this, alongside Elder Scrolls 3, it was one of the first truly massive feeling Western RPGs to land on a console, as the Xbox version predated the game's release on PC, showing that console gaming could rival computers. KOTOR sold out in 4 days thanks to hungry Star Wars fans that were inspired by rave reviews about its story, writing, and fully voiced characters. If you enjoyed the recently released prequel themes, this game felt like an epic continuation, and if you disliked them, KOTOR's deep narrative was the salve for your wounds. Knights of the Old Republic is still heralded by many Star Wars fans as one of the most engaging tales in the universe over 20 years later. 2004, Ninja Gaiden. Ninja Gaiden might have felt like an odd choice perhaps for a revived franchise of the 1990s, but this timed exclusive for Xbox was one of the surprise hits of 2004. After Ryu Hayabusa had joined the ranks of Dead or Alive during a dormant period of his own series, this year finally saw him take centre stage again. With the character being recognised by worldwide Dead or Alive players, Tecmo and Team Ninja designed the new Ninja Gaiden with Western audiences in mind, appropriately so, as while sales in Japan were low, as was the Xbox install base, it was a huge hit in the US and Europe. Upon release, Ninja Gaiden became synonymous with rewarding challenge. In a world between the era of NES hard and the Soulsborne influence on today's industry, Ryu's return was seen as a test of gaming mettle in the mid-2000s. The game didn't let up from start to finish, and in particular its pace and level design were singled out by critics as strong points. Ninja Gaiden also had some incredible creature design brilliantly realised in a way that showed the technical capabilities of the hardware available. Whilst the franchise has since turned quiet, for a while Ninja Gaiden was a series that PlayStation fans envied. 2005, Forza Motorsport. Since 1997, Gran Turismo had been the last word in racing sims. Many had tried and failed to topple PlayStation and Polyphony Digital's Titan franchise, but hadn't ever really come close to the same reaction or staying power. With every new iteration, Gran Turismo pushed the genre ahead to craft the most complete racing experience. Forza Motorsport's developers directly set out to be the next competitor to the throne, and considering both its consistency and brand value in the decades since, it's fair to say that they succeeded. What truly set Forza a step ahead of its contemporaries was car customization. Greatly expanding what the Gran Turismo series had done before, players could now swap an engine out of one machine into another and experience relatively realistic results. More than this, the game allowed for 100 layers of cosmetic customization, giving racers a chance to decorate their many vehicles with very authored designs and then take them online with Xbox Live. Despite the Xbox 360 launching in late 2005, the most important Microsoft exclusive of the year without question is Forza Motorsport on the original Xbox. 2006, Dead Rising. The first year of the Xbox 360 was stacked. The original Gears of War, Oblivion, Rainbow Six Vegas, all of these games were not just fantastic experiences, but pushed the industry forward. However, there was none so unique as Dead Rising. Whilst Capcom had plenty of experience already with zombies thanks to Resident Evil, this brand new IP allowed for a totally different take and feel. Instead of dark, cramped corridors where players fought tooth and nail against a couple of terrifying undead, Dead Rising put hundreds of zombies into the open space of a brightly lit mall. It then thrust traffic cones and guitars and shopping trolleys into players' hands and basically said, go nuts. Being designed specifically for the next generation did create issues with tiny on-screen text for players with standard definition TVs, but if anything it just felt as though the future had arrived. Seeing so many enemies swarming photojournalist Frank West was mind-blowing, as was mowing them down in a sedan. Dead Rising was one of the biggest flag wavers for what the Xbox 360 was capable of and sold over 1 million copies. 2007, Halo 3. The original Halo had helped Microsoft establish themselves as a real competitor in the console gaming space. As such, each subsequent release was given appropriate pomp and circumstance, becoming the biggest launch event in the industry at the time. Halo 3's in particular was special. The finish the fight marketing for Halo was huge and incredibly powerful, and helped to make the game feel like a real moment in entertainment history. As the capstone of the original trilogy, Halo 3 rewarded loyal players of the franchise by providing an epic conclusion to the story of Master Chief, Cortana, the Covenant, and the Halo rings. Delivering perhaps the most exciting and emotionally rewarding campaign of the franchise, Bungie managed to somehow meet all expectations. And then when players picked themselves back up after the incredible story, they also had one of the deepest and most accomplished online components in FPS history still ahead of them. Alongside new maps, weapons and vehicles, what made Halo 3 so special was its community and how Bungie utilised it. Thanks to the Forge mode, which allowed Halo's huge fanbase to create custom content, the game evolved slowly over time as it wholeheartedly embraced popular custom maps and game types. This not only helped it stay at the top of the mountain of incredible Xbox 360 releases throughout the console's lifespan, it also set a precedent for other online games to follow. 2008, Gears of War 2. As close to perfect as the original Gears of War was, Gears 2 managed to at least match, if not exceed, its forebear. No better is this evidenced by Gears 2's Metacritic score sitting 1 point below the original game for critics, but 1 point higher for the fans. Gears 2 once again walked the line between over-the-top meathead monster blasting violence and a touching turbulent story of human survival. Whilst on the outside the game promised bravado and brutality, its superb writing and lead performances made it a testament to the cinematic scope of gaming at the time. Sure, Halo Forza may have been Xbox's right hand, but Gears was often just as big or bigger. Perfectly demonstrating this on its opening weekend, Gears 2 set the record for the highest simultaneous player count on Xbox Live by breaking the 1 million player threshold. Reason for this being that Gears of War 2's online component was a massive step up from the first, featuring an innovative matchmaking system and a broader selection of modes. One of these, of course, was Horde. When the market was chock-a-block with PvP shooters, Gears 2 tested the camaraderie and teamwork of friends against waves of enemies in a mode that altogether defined the best that the series had to offer. 2009 Left 4 Dead 2. Like the original, Left 4 Dead 2 was a console exclusive for the Xbox 360, which allowed owners of the machine to gloat that the system could do some of the more complex computing that was more synonymous with PC gaming. And also, like the original, Left 4 Dead 2 was entering a gaming space that was overstuffed with zombie-themed survival games. However, no one did it quite like Valve and Turtle Rock. Simple mechanics, incredible sound design, and a player-to-enemy balance that meant that teamwork was a must if you wanted to survive. On its surface, the game was more of what you love. New maps, new characters, new weapons, new special zombie types, but the game in general is a tighter and broader package than its predecessor. In particular, the AI director under the hood of the original game received a major overhaul. Now, not only were repeat playthroughs altered by enemy and weapon spawns, but the locations themselves could change slightly every time, with tweaks to weather, lighting, and even layout. As such, Left 4 Dead 2, even 15 years later, still gets around 20,000 players a month, going to show that it's never been bested when it comes to group PvE zombie slaying chaos. 2010 Mass Effect 2. At the time, Mass Effect 2 was seen as a huge improvement over its original, already impressive sibling. In the years that followed, it's been largely deemed as the best entry in the franchise, if not the entire genre. Unlike Mass Effect 3, it had a satisfying climax where your decisions as Commander Shepard had a long-term effect, and unlike Mass Effect 1, it didn't have awful driving controls. In all seriousness, BioWare's spacefaring sequel made the most of being the middle part of the adventure. With the overarching story already set up, Mass Effect 2 could instead shift its focus to building character interactions and then fold these back into the game's universe. Players connected with Mass Effect 2 on both macro and micro levels all at once, as each NPC side story explored who they were whilst also fleshing out their species and their alliances and struggles therein. It also didn't hurt that the combat felt so much better and that the UI was so smooth. The game received universal acclaim on release, being nominated for and winning a slew of awards, including Best Xbox 360 Game, Best RPG, and Game of the Year. Mass Effect 2 remains a beautiful experience, both aesthetically speaking and on a more touching human level, as you and the relationships you forged march into the great unknown together. 2011 Gears of War 3. With the time that development now takes in today's age, getting a complete trilogy released on a single system is a pretty unlikely affair. However, if one franchise were to perfectly embody the lifespan of the Xbox 360 from every possible perspective, it would be Gears of War. As such, it's fitting that Gears of War 3 was the best Xbox game released in 2011. Whilst the campaign of Gears of War 2 tends to be the overall fan favourite, the crescendo of the Marcus Phoenix trilogy has some of the most gut-punching and air-punching moments in the entire series, all set to some stunning visuals and cinematography. Like its predecessor, Gears 3 was no slouch on the multiplayer side of things either. The potential of Horde mode was cracked wide open, building on what came before by giving players fortifications against the oncoming enemy waves, and for the first time, the campaign supported 4-player co-op. Perhaps the most underrated element of Gears 3 though was its challenges and rewards. Sure, it asked players to put in some serious work to unlock its cosmetics, but it tracked progress across every single mode, making sure that players who came for one thing at least tried out the wealth of content in the conclusion of the original trilogy. 2012 Forza Horizon. With every Xbox showcase that rolls around, players not engaged in driving games will inevitably roll their eyes at the amount of time given to the Forza franchise. But with it crossing the $1 billion mark in 2017, it's no surprise that Microsoft has leaned so heavily on it over the years. And Forza Horizon was a big part of the franchise's continued success, crafting a series in its own right by taking drivers off the speedway and out into the hills of Colorado. Whilst open world driving wasn't new, it hadn't been approached with the same degree of attention that the Forza brand demanded. Allowing racers to navigate mountain paths, winding foothills, and the open road made for a totally completely different experience, which was all the sweeter thanks to Forza's trademark tightness in controls and depth of content. This total shake-up of style, with finish lines for races now being randomly generated and new game types like cat and mouse, was particularly welcomed by the online community. Horizon's more open-ended vibe allowed for an entry point to those who were daunted by the intensity of motorsport and simply wanted to bomb around a beautiful rendering of the American countryside in over 200 potential vehicles. 2013, Dead Rising 3. The Xbox One era was a truly troubling time for Microsoft. The following entries may well reflect that, as Xbox started to move away from exclusive releases and tried to bill itself as the hub of entertainment in the home. And did nobody tell them that they could actually do both? And that's not to say that some games around this time don't deserve their praise, and there's a lot to like about Capcom's Dead Rising 3, but if a solid 7 out of 10 is your best exclusive game of the year, then that's very telling. And whilst Dead Rising 3 was far from the prettiest princess at the next-gen ball, it found appropriately familiar ways to impress. The seamless, significantly bigger map than the first two games was populated with hordes of the undead and was the perfect staging area for mayhem. The refinement of the controls therefore goes a long way to making exploration and zombie killing sprees a breeze, be that on foot or in one of the game's many new combo vehicles. Dead Rising is all about massive mindless destruction, and this was multiplied tenfold for every additional player added to the same map via the game's co-op mode. Despite being hampered by lackluster writing and tonal whiplash, Dead Rising 3 was at least a solid start to the Xbox One, even if it wasn't the system seller that a new console so desperately needs. 2014, Sunset Overdrive. With the number of exclusives in its first year being so painfully low and Microsoft fumbling the launch in other ways such as the DRM controversy, it's meant that the hidden gems on Xbox One were truly hidden. That is to say that Sunset Overdrive is an overlooked cult classic that deserved so much better. Whereas post-apocalyptic was already in danger of becoming a tired phrase, Insomniac Games christened Sunset Overdrive an awesome apocalypse. A bombastic, frenetic, stylish affair where players glide, grind and skate around a colourful city, blasting robots and energy drink-fueled zombies with weapons such as guitars, firework guns and bowling ball launchers. It felt like a Saturday morning cartoon in the best possible way. And truly, Sunset Overdrive might be Insomniac's secret magnum opus. The ridiculous arsenal was akin to their Ratchet & Clank series, combined with the real sense of momentum that the studio's eventual PlayStation Spider-Man series would be acclaimed for. But all contained within a wonderfully cartoonish setting, complete with comic book-like text appearing alongside some of your actions. Insomniac Games might be one of the most reliable development studios of the modern era, which is precisely why they've been given the keys to the Marvel Kingdom under the ownership of Sony. That said, Sunset Overdrive accomplishes perhaps that little bit more by being so brash, charmingly stupid, and refreshingly original. 2015, Rare Replay. Several years before the launch of Game Pass, 2015's Rare Replay, intentionally or otherwise, made for a strong rebuttal against the talk that Xbox didn't have a solid portfolio. Or moreover, Microsoft's acquisition of Rare gave them a solid portfolio by proxy. Celebrating 30 years of the company with 30 of their best titles, the quality and artistry on display was inarguable. The package featured Viva Pinata, Blast Core, as well as the remastered versions of Perfect Dark and the Banjo-Kazooie games, plus a slew of early ZX Spectrum outings. It's arguably cheating to feature a collection of classics, but Rare Replay was so much more than that. Everything was tied together with the attention to detail that one expects from Rare, with a charming UI and unlockable documentary pieces on the company's history. And whilst Rare Replay wasn't a brand new game, it did feature the console debut of the Battletoads arcade sequel. This was the extra cherry on top of the video game preservation sundae. When many classic games are getting harder to get a hold of, Rare put 30 of their best in one place for a mere $30. And despite criticisms that it wasn't totally comprehensive thanks to various copyright issues from Nintendo, Rare Replay was still well worth its below average asking price, and even more so in later years when GoldenEye was eventually gifted to owners for free. 2016 Quantum Break. There's some irony perhaps in that the Xbox One's infamous E3 unveiling and its obsession with TV did coincide with one of the better exclusives of 2016 being a hybrid piece of media. Quantum Break was Remedy Entertainment's first console game since 2010's Alan Wake and is perhaps even more of a cult classic than that had been. Between missions of Quantum Break, players were invited to sit back and enjoy an episode of a serialized live-action drama that took place alongside their own actions. Even if the reception to the show itself was varied, the concept was intriguing. Performances from lead actors such as Aidan Gillen and the late great Lance Reddick were the glue between the two halves. From a gameplay standpoint, where Quantum Break perhaps didn't always land as a shooter was more than made up by the player's time-based powers, freezing enemies, dashing to and from cover, and using time itself as a shield, all of which can be comboed into each other for some seriously rewarding and incredible looking combat sequences. Where it truly excelled was its environmental design and the way that players used those powers to navigate and solve puzzles. Whilst Quantum Break never became the huge IP that Microsoft had perhaps hoped for, it exceeded sales expectations and became the console's best seller up to that point. 2017 Cuphead. Few new IPs get quite a strong a reaction as Cuphead did in 2014 when it was shown very briefly at E3 that year as part of a sizzle reel. Over time, the run and gunner inspired by the golden age of animation grew a significant level of interest because there was nothing out there on the market like it. As such, it made a splash when it landed and in fact delivered, becoming the most enviable Xbox game that year and perhaps across the lifespan of the Xbox One. In a time where hunger for challenging games was rising, Cuphead offered something different from the dark and brooding Soulsborne games and their many copycats by harkening back to games of the past. And best of all, it did so in a beautiful, bizarre and consistent art style that only the current generation could handle. Even when Cuphead was smashing players from pillar to post, which was all of the time really, it was a delight for the eyes. Cuphead fever was truly massive, spawning a Netflix show, a tabletop game, and even getting some unexpected representation in the video game historical encyclopedia that was Nintendo's Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. 2018 Sea of Thieves. With heads of the Xbox brand laser focused on building the value of Game Pass as a one-stop shop since its release in June 2017, Xbox's roster of 2018 exclusives was almost non-existent. Crackdown 3, State of Decay 2 and even Sea of Thieves all launched to tepid results. However, over time the clear winner of that trio has not only risen up as one of the best Xbox games but also one of the best games that year period, and also a shining example of live service done right. Sea of Thieves' biggest draws have always been its social aspects and freedom, allowing teams of players to board their custom ships and follow their hearts. There's treasure to be found, other pirates to battle, and monsters in the deep to flee from. Each moment of tension, panic and loss makes every shared success at discovery or victory that much sweeter. It's Rare's commitment to quality that turned the game around, even going so far as to secure license deals with Secret of Monkey Island and Pirates of the Caribbean for beefy stories that fit so joyfully into the tapestry of the Devil's Shroud. Sea of Thieves launched as a very pretty game with that distinctive Rare charm, but nothing beyond the surface. In one of gaming's greatest redemption arcs, it slowly became one of the most rewarding online games still active today, proving its worth to the 30,000 players it still retains 6 years later. 2019 Gears 5. In 2016, the Coalition, a development studio handpicked by Microsoft to take the reins from Epic Games, put out their first new story in the Gears of War saga. Even with a new cast of characters, a new threat, and a significant time jump, Gears of War 4 was criticised as playing things too safe. Reacting to this is where Gears 5's true strengths lay. New robotic companion Jack could be upgraded to change the flow of battle. The game featured optional larger open areas that, whilst poorly marketed as open world, made for a refreshing change of pace and allowed players to pause the flow of the story to explore the world a little more. Overall, the level and encounter design are up there as some of the best in the series, and the game was superbly well written, offering an intriguingly more human drive to the Gears universe. Unfortunately, the game was severely let down on launch by an extremely thin multiplayer portion. Gears 5's multiple awards of Best Xbox Xbox game at the time felt more like the circumstance of it yet again being one of the very few exclusives released in 2019 for the green brand. That said, like Sea of Thieves, time and updates were kind to Gears 5 in turning it around to something that felt more worthy. 2020 Ori and the Will of the Wisps. 2020's long-awaited Ori and the Will of the Wisps was the perfect example of what a sequel can and should do. Instead of being a very pretty homage to the genre like the first game was, Will of the Wisps expanded its influence to include more contemporary titles, unlocking the franchise's full potential. With a larger map, there was adequate space for the studio to expand the scope of what an Ori game could be. A selection of well-realised NPCs fleshed out the new location of Newen, almost all of whom served purposes like tracking stats or offering side quests. Boss battles entered the fray for the first time, giving the pace of the game a more precise flow. In turn, these gelled perfectly with Ori's new blade and projectile-based offense, which overhauled the combat into something ultimately more satisfying. It would be impossible to talk about Ori without complimenting its art direction, and Will of the Wisps was gorgeous in every regard. A brilliant soundtrack, jaw-dropping visuals, and some captivating animation. There was something indelibly warm and sincere about the game's presentation and touching story beats. Both Ori titles are a testament to games as art, but it's easy to argue that Will of the Wisps remains the most compelling feeling Metroidvania still today. 2021 Forza Horizon 5. Realistically speaking, Microsoft had two exclusives launch in 2021. One of these was Halo Infinite, which, whilst it can be argued as a great total package now, wasn't exactly warmly received at the time. The other was Forza Horizon 5, which, in a series which regularly scores extremely well on Metacritic, became one of the highest praised entries in Xbox's most consistent franchise and opened up to 10 million players in its first week. Forza Horizon 5 was all about refining an idea to its sharpest point. It was the so far logical endpoint for a side series that took Forza's racing sim mechanics and put them in a more arcadey setting. You couldn't drive more than a few minutes across the game's huge map without encountering some sort of objective, ranging from off-road races to finding rare cars in barns, from drift challenges to wreckage events that see players destroying pinatas. Everything was optional and brilliantly all equally viable as players consistently earned adventure points towards their completion and the rewards of new vehicles from the game's absurd collection of over 800 came thick and fast. Forza Horizon 5 was more about freedom than ever. This also included the freedom to ignore it all and simply enjoy the game's refined driving mechanics while exploring one of the prettiest open worlds released this generation. 2022 Grounded. Grounded was exciting right from the off. Developed by reliable RPG hands Obsidian Entertainment, the game entered early access in 2020 with a campaign that was about 20% complete. In the 2 years between this and the full release, the company were praised for using feedback from their audience to shape the game, which at one stage, while still in early access, got to a whopping player base of 5 million. The result of this was the best Xbox game in 2022, a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids inspired adventure where players are reduced to the size of an ant, dropped in a backyard which now feels like a jungle, and tasked with protecting themselves from terrifying insects, crafting themselves into a formidable survivalist, and trying to escape. Aside from its brilliantly realised setting, this was what made Grounded great. It was a rare survival game that had an end goal. Rather than just crafting more and more until you were unstoppable, players knew that their ultimate destination was to finish the story and leave the backyard for good. This really helped drive both solo players and groups forward rather than drop off early, all assisted by an addictive gameplay loop which was expertly paced with meaty quests and satisfying character growth. In a genre swimming with some pretty half-assed attempts to cash in on the survival craze, Grounded proved that good things can come in small packages. 2023 Hi-Fi Rush. 2023 wasn't without its issues for the green brand, but it also had plenty of wins. For the company, their acquisition of Activision Blizzard was finally a done deal. For gamers, Xbox delivered console exclusives like Cocoon, Lies of P, and Starfield. Whilst the last of those was perhaps the biggest and most anticipated launch of the year for the console, it was met with very mixed reactions. On the other hand, Hi-Fi Rush felt like a unifying moment. The slick, stylish action game Shadow dropped in January, kicking off 2023 with smiles amongst Game Pass owners who had immediate access to Tango Gameworks' latest accomplishment. And an accomplishment it was, as Hi-Fi Rush's sense of humour, breezy pacing and chaotic gameplay cut through the usual modern gaming fare with aplomb. The rhythm-based combat was entirely addictive and paired wonderfully with the game's colourful world, which animated perfectly in time to the beat to create a setting that was simply satisfying to be in. Appropriately, Hi-Fi Rush's audio design and soundtrack went on to win awards at the end of the year, proving it left a mark throughout all of 2023. With the sad closure of Tango in the following year, it's a sting in the narrative to know that Hi-Fi Rush will not get the sequel that it no doubt deserves. And finally, 2024 Hellblade 2 Senua's Sacrifice. And thus we come to the current year as of recording. Whilst 2024 is only half over, it's been a very bad year for Microsoft. Aside from the ill will associated with the heartless closures of smaller studios, such as the aforementioned Tango Gameworks, it's also just been a very quiet year for games. I mean, Hellblade 2 wins purely by default by being the only Xbox console exclusive to launch so far. In its defense, Senua's Sacrifice did grab a strong Metacritic of 81 on release, with an audience reaction sitting at a sturdy 7.1. The game has been praised for its gorgeous graphics, stunning location design, and the continued immersive storytelling of Senua's psychosis from the first game. But it was also criticised for not shaking things up enough. Whilst the devs clearly spent more time on combat-related animations, and they do look great, the game lacks depth in terms of approaching the combat itself. One's perspective and expectation is everything with Hellblade 2. Microsoft's marketing of the game implied it was closer to AAA fare than Ninja Theory perhaps intended. If the goal was to craft a solid narrative-driven puzzle adventure like the first game, then the developers have certainly succeeded. It's impossible to say where Hellblade 2 will find itself for Xbox when awards season rolls around, and it seems like a great example of the doubt and mistrust that the Xbox brand continues to unfortunately generate in 2024.